You know how your newsfeed just scrolls on? Same old stuff. Well, yesterday morning, something a bit different popped up. This announcement about a new US-UK trade agreement. Kind of cut through the noise, didn't it?
It really did, yeah. And that's exactly what we're going to dig into now. We've pulled together a few different things for this deep dive. Some news reports, naturally, but also a really lively Reddit discussion, actually.
Yeah.
Gives you that immediate reaction feel.
Oh, interesting.
And a briefing doc laying out the supposed key points.
Right. So the plan is to unpack this for you.
Yeah.
What do we actually know about this agreement so far? What are the main things jumping out from these, different viewpoints? And, why does it matter?
Okay, so kicking things off.
Yeah.
The announcement itself, it didn't exactly follow the usual script, did it?
No, not really.
Right.
President Trump used Truth Social, his platform, to break the news, called it full and comprehensive. And he framed it as like the first of several big international deals coming down the pike. The official timing was meant to be around 10 a.m. Eastern on Thursday. And across the pond, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer also said he'd give an update later that day. So sounds like a coordinated effort initially.
Initially, yeah. But then you had Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins kind of tempering expectations.
Yeah.
She described it as being in the early stages.
Ah, okay. So not quite full and comprehensive then.
Well, she used the phrase agreement in concept,
Mm-hmm.
which, suggests the details are still being hammered out. She even mentioned she's planning a trip to the UK. It's an interesting contrast in tone, isn't it?
Oh.
Trump's big, bold statement, and then Rollins being a bit more cautious, maybe managing expectations.
Or maybe just different audiences. And Downing Street, they were keen to highlight Starmer as the main negotiator for the UK side.
Exactly, positioning him centrally.
So full and comprehensive might be the goal, not the current reality, more like the outline of the deal.
That seems like a fair assessment based on what we're hearing. The
Yeah.
framework, not the finished article yet.
Which leads us to the core question. What's actually in this framework? What are the sources pointing to?
The big thing, overwhelmingly, seems to be tariffs, reducing them. You remember those pretty hefty 25% tariffs the U.S. put on UK steel and autos under Trump?
Yeah, those hit hard.
They really did. So the expectation is this deal tackles those directly, offers some relief to those UK industries. I mean, that kind of tariff makes a huge difference to cost and competitiveness.
Makes total sense. That would be a big win for the UK side. But trade deals are usually give and take, right? What's the UK likely putting on the table?
Good question. The general consensus is the UK will lower its own tariffs on American cars in return. And there's also chatter about the UK possibly giving some ground on its digital services tax. That's been a real sticking point with the big US tech firms, hasn't it?
Right, that tax targeting the revenues of large digital companies. The U.S. wasn't happy about that, arguing it unfairly targeted their firms.
Exactly. So maybe some movement there.
So it sounds like very targeted adjustments, specific sectors. It's interesting how many sources are stressing this isn't a full free trade agreement. They're calling it a mini deal or a pact on tariffs.
Yeah, and that distinction feels important. It's not the wide-ranging, cover-everything type of deal. It seems much more focused on sorting out these specific tariff issues.
Okay, let's switch perspectives. What about President Trump's angle here? What's the strategy from his side, do you think?
Well, he's definitely selling it as a victory, strengthening the U.S.-UK bond, the first of many deals. That's the narrative.
It does feel like maybe a slight change in tactics. He announced those sweeping tariffs back in April, but then seemed to suggest moving towards these, country-by-country deals.
That could be a pivot, yeah. Looking at the bigger picture, the UK got hit with those 25% tariffs on key goods, but they didn't face some of the higher sort of retaliatory tariffs other countries did, maybe because of the trade balance.
Possible.
So this deal gives Trump a diplomatic win, something positive to show on the trade front, especially after all the international pushback against his earlier tariff policies.
And you mentioned the Reddit discussion. What were people saying there about his motives?
Yeah, it was interesting. Some users were definitely speculating that he needed a win, something tangible to show that his whole tariff strategy is actually working, to justify the approach.
Right, a concrete example to point to. It all feeds into that larger political narrative.
Precisely. A deal like this, however targeted, can be framed as proof that the tough stance gets results.
Okay, let's flip back to the UK. What were Starmer's main goals going into this?
Well, getting a trade deal with the U.S. was a major stated priority for him and his government. Our sources really emphasize that the UK government wants to showcase this as, evidence of post-Brexit success, making deals outside the EU framework, They just did one with India recently, so this builds on that.
Right, demonstrating independence in trade policy.
But there's a really big but here, and it came through strongly in the sources, especially that Reddit thread. Food standards. Starmer's government has drawn a very firm line. They're saying absolutely no compromise on UK food safety standards. So no imports of things like chlorine-rinsed chicken or hormone-treated beef, even if the U.S. might want more access for its agricultural products.
Wow, okay. That's a significant red line, as they call it, balancing trade benefits against public health concerns, or at least public perception of them.
Absolutely. And it shows they might be willing to limit the scope of the deal to protect those domestic standards. That point really resonated in the online discussion. Lots of strong feelings about not lowering food safety rules.
You could really feel that concern online, yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a passing comment. Were there other UK priorities mentioned?
Yes, negotiators were also reportedly pushing for exemptions for pharmaceuticals from potential new U.S. tariffs. The UK pharma sector is huge, so protecting that would be important.
Makes sense.
And don't forget, the U.S. is the single biggest market for British cars. So getting those auto tariffs reduced is, well, it's pretty crucial for the UK economy.
So it definitely sounds like potential upsides for both sides, assuming these details hold. Even the Bank of England governor welcomed it, saying it would reduce uncertainty. That sounds positive from a financial perspective.
It does. Less uncertainty is generally good for business confidence, for investment. But, like we said, those public concerns in the UK, especially around food, they haven't gone away. That Reddit discussion made it clear. People are wary about potential compromises, even if they're not explicitly on the table right now. We'll need to see the fine print.
And this deal doesn't just exist in a US-UK bubble, does it? What about the wider impact? Like, how does this affect the UK's relationship with the EU?
That's a key question, isn't it? Does this shift the dynamics? Some analysts are already talking about a potential, well, maybe a turf war between UK and EU manufacturers, if this gives the UK an edge in certain sectors selling into the US.
Increased competition.
Potentially. The UK-EU relationship is always complex, and this deal adds another layer to it.
We also saw some nervousness on Reddit, didn't we? People worrying about future U.S. demands, things like access to the NHS, even though that wasn't mentioned in this announcement.
Yeah, those anxieties are definitely there. It reflects how central the NHS is in the UK psyche, and maybe some historical baggage from other trade talks. It's not in this tariff deal's details, but those underlying concerns often surface.
Okay, let's zoom out for a second. This wasn't the only thing happening, was it? What's the wider context here?
No. Absolutely not. It's quite telling that the Bank of England cut interest rates on the same day. They mentioned easing inflation, but also, significantly, global uncertainty, partly linked to U.S. trade policy. So the timing is interesting.
Right.
And remember, this deal comes after Trump imposed those Liberation Day tariffs earlier. So this looks like it might be rolling some of that back, at least for the UK.
And globally.
Well, reports suggest the U.S. is also having some initial trade talks with China and Switzerland this weekend. So there's definitely movement on multiple trade fronts.
It was also interesting seeing that comment from the former German ambassador Wolfgang Ischinger. He was talking about needing long-term U.S. support for Ukraine, but also noted a more cooperative tone from VP Vance recently. And he had that advice for Europeans, didn't he? Take Trump seriously, but maybe not always literally.
Yes. That piece of advice feels very relevant right now. Trying to read the signals on trade policy. Look past the headlines. Focus on the actual details as they emerge.
Definitely. So as we kind of wrap up this first look, this deep dive into the announcement, what are the main takeaways for you? What should people hold on to?
Okay, 3 main things, I think. First, this seems to be primarily about tariffs offering relief to UK industries like steel and autos hit by previous U.S. actions. That's the core. Second, it might signal a bit of a shift in U.S. trade strategy. Maybe moving towards these targeted bilateral deals instead of just broad tariffs. We'll see. And third, for the UK, it's being presented as a significant diplomatic win, a sign of post-Brexit deal-making ability, even while they're trying to hold firm on sensitive stuff like food standards.
But lots of question marks still hanging there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We don't have the full details yet. We don't know the exact compromises made on either side. That's crucial. And the longer-term impact. How does this affect U.S.-UK trade flows down the line? And what does it mean for the UK's relationship with the EU and the rest of the world? Still a lot to watch.
Yeah, definitely. So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. How could this specific deal, this tariff agreement, actually pave the way for bigger changes in how global trade works? And what are the ripples for, regular consumers and businesses in the US and UK beyond just those tariffs coming down? Something to keep an eye on for sure.